When the extended joint exercise started, we all assumed that we would learn how powerful and horrific the human military was. We expected to have to struggle to keep up with them at every single task. We did not expect honed chaos. On one hand, the humans frequently move with almost mechanical precision. Complex tasks performed thoughtlessly, sometimes while attention was almost completely focused on something else. Everyone knew their role, and was expected to perform that role no matter what else was going on around them, unless ordered otherwise. On the other hand, they were an unruly bunch. Unless reporting to a high-ranking officer, almost no sentence escaped their mouths without an unnecessary expletive being added somewhere. They were easy to rile up, and engaged in theatrics of one sort or another with frightening regularity. Quite often, I thought that bloodshed was imminent, but fortunately, I never saw actual fighting break out between them. We had all been briefed on two things quite regularly leading up to the exercise. Two especially tricky rules to understand. With half their crew joining ours, and half of ours joining theirs, there was much to learn before the exchange happened, but two things were drilled into us time and time again. The first rule was that half their communication was non-verbal, focusing heavily on facial expression. Despite months of training, we still learned much about their expressions as we worked alongside them. Which made one crew member on the shift that I worked unusual. While the muscles on most people's faces seemed to work overtime with every little thing they did, this one did not. Quite the opposite. He carried the same intense stare with everything that he did. We worked together in the secondary sensor room. Do not let the name think of it as a secondary sensor array. All this meant was that this was dedicated to analysis and in-depth scans that would require more thorough analysis. While the AI could handle all of it, really, the humans themselves still wanted to pore through everything as well, as that might lead to leaps of intuition that would bring them closer. This data was also important for weapon systems. Gillis was, however, an expert. He could analyze and categorize twice as fast as his colleagues. The officer in charge of us had to give him a direct order to take any break, and, what would become important to us as he worked alongside the humans, everyone came to him for advice about procedure and how to do things. He would always stop what he was doing immediately, stare at you for a moment, then patiently explain what to do, why to do it, and give any advice that he might have. Sometimes he would sigh, or give the other verbal theatrics, but his voice would always be even, and the most that his expression would change was how his brows would draw together a little before answering. Then he would look back at his station, pause, sigh softly, and get back to work. Someone once told me that he hated any interruption to his work, and would gladly work through his breaks and meal cycle if they would have let him. He never once complained or resisted helping us. When he was off duty, he was always in one of the lesser used corridors, pressed up against the wall to minimize his presence, a tablet in his hand. He offered no words to anyone unless spoken to first. In the mess hall, others would sit with him, chatting among each other as he ate and stared at his tablet, only occasionally interacting with the others before returning to his reading. On occasion, he would sit with us, silently reading and eating. Among my shift, he was the oddity. I found out later that there were others like him in the other shift or in other stations, but I only knew of him. While everyone interacted quite regularly, he eschewed interaction as much as possible. The only time that he willingly initiated interaction, his eyes would go wide and he would speak quickly, impatiently awaiting responses about whatever he was talking about. Sometimes it would be obvious that his conversation partner wanted to continue the conversation, but he would walk away as soon as he deemed the conversation done. We had settled in well. Within a quarter of our stay, we had figured out how to perform adequately. Not as well as if we had been in our ship, but well enough that nobody complained. We were learning so much about how to operate with humans. There are so many little things that I could tell you, too many to actually list. They are a race of such nuance, despite their chaos and precision. And sometimes the chaos is simply another form of precision, in a way that I can never adequately describe. For example, one spoken word can mean so many things. Excuse me, get out of my way. I'm sorry, take a look at this. I do not understand what I am looking at. You're about to make a mistake. I made a mistake. And so much more. On the surface, this is madness, and our translators could not adequately perform their duties. However, we came to understand this word quite well, through contextual cues. And then, almost 3/4 into the exercise, we arrived at a patrol point. Our ship had agreed to accompany the human ship on its patrol for this exercise. It is something that I am grateful for. As we arrived, we detected a distress call from a ship being boarded by bandits. The red alert was immediately called. When it did, all idle chatter ceased. There was still a host of things being continually called out, but all of it relevant to the situation at hand. Through our sensors, I could see that it was not just 1 or 2 ships, but almost a fleet of vault ships. Were we still on our ship, we would have fled almost immediately. We could not save the vessel being boarded. We could not survive that sort of firepower. Even with the human vessel backing us, I doubted we could have survived. Instead, I watched on the sensors as we paved the way into combat at a full burn. I'm sure that the ship's captain sent messages of warning. Humans were famous for giving opponents every chance to back down. But as soon as their weapons fired, milliseconds passed before the human ship returned fire. I watched as the ship moved to defend our ship, taking the brunt of the fire for it as it charged ahead. The communication in our post was terse, not a word wasted. We scrubbed sensor data, fed it to the weapons officers, even as we could feel the damage we were taking reverberate through the ship. I understand now why so many think that humans use AI on their warships in ways that break the laws. I understand why the Teal refer to humans as demons. Against overwhelming odds, the ship fought far better than it should have. But it was not designed to shield another ship. I was not the least bit surprised when the order to abandon ship was announced. I was, however, surprised to see Gillis didn't even look up at the announcement. I knew that he would frequently become fixated on his work until he did not notice the world around him. Other humans described it as closing off. Thinking that he was simply doing that, I touched his arm and called his name. For the first time, I saw emotion in his face as he looked up at me. Teal referred to humans as demons for many reasons. His lips peeled from his teeth. His eyes were wide. His entire face was red, including his ears. Veins bulged, and spittle flew from his mouth as the normally quiet human screamed at me. If I had not seen the transformation, I would have assumed that it was another human. "Get off my ship! I'll be goddamned if one of mine dies because of lollygagging! Off my ship!" I was intimidated. I did as I was ordered, even though I believed that I technically outranked him. The way to the escape pod was memorized by now. The procedure to secure myself well practiced. Someone closed the hatch behind me, not even waiting for Gillis. The pod was launched, taking damage on the way out, before making a hard burn to get clear. We were locked off from the combat, not knowing what was going on around us. I later learned that the human vessel fell silent as the escape pods launched. The Vault ships, thinking it was disabled, moved to bypass it to attack our warship. It was at this point that the human vessel opened fire again. They fought bravely, with far fewer people than could operate it. I wish I could have seen it. It more than evened the odds before it was destroyed. The Vault made sure that there was nothing left before they were destroyed. They themselves did not last much longer after that. Our ship made sure of that. But we did not know that. We did not know anything, trapped in an escape pod with no windows, piloted by an artificial intelligence. The human silently stared at the sole empty seat in the pod, the seat assigned to Gillis. I felt that I had to explain. He made me leave without him. Only one acknowledged my words. Sounds like Gilly. He said, I fought for the words. He said I was one of his and needed to leave. He was right. I could not help but notice that the tone was dismissive, in a way that I could not quite describe or understand. I do not understand. How was I one of his? Nobody said anything. We never interacted. He sat with you once, another said, but he ignored us. One of them turned to me in anger, but forced himself to calm down. He's a tist. He's like a cat. Before I could ask, he caught himself. Cats. They're an earth pet. They don't necessarily want to do things with you, but they show you that they like you by spending time around you. Just because he didn't talk with you doesn't mean he didn't like you. Doesn't mean that you aren't one of his. One of the others spoke up. He's always like that. If he puts up with your presence for a little bit before leaving, he doesn't dislike you, but he doesn't like you either. If he leaves immediately, well, you done gone and got on his list of people he doesn't like. With that, the other humans began telling stories about him, their tones awkward, their words frequently halting. I am told that this is part of the human grieving process, as was the heavy consumption of alcohol that happened after we were rescued by our ship. I do not know how Gillis died. I know that the record logs say that he was operating his console until the moment that the ship was destroyed, feeding relevant data to those still operating weapons. I know that he had sealed off the room so he wasn't killed when Vacuum took the ship. I know that he was found holding his tablet, having died reading. The humans that I spoke to all seemed to think that was appropriate, even if they were sparse on the rest of the details. As much as the first rule that was drilled into us was helpful to us, I will always remember the second rule. Humans will bond to anything. They will bond to each other. They will bond to their ships. They will bond to animals on first sight. They will bond to specific tools, eschewing all others, if at all possible. They will bond to strangers. We do not form bonds like that. I do not understand that trait. I do not understand many things about humans, but out of respect, I will forever say that Gillis was my human.